Well, welcome back to Acts on Video. We are in Acts chapter 20 through 22. And as we finish up the book of Acts now through Acts chapter 28, we're going to find a sort of rhythm that happens. Paul speaking before somebody, Paul traveling to the next trial. It's kind of the same rhythm going on, but there's some things to be learned in these last verses. So let's dive into Acts chapter 20 and 21 and 22. In Acts chapter 20, Paul is preparing to head up to Jerusalem. He wants to go back there. He has a sense that that's where sort of this last part of his life is going to begin. In Jerusalem. As you read these chapters, you're going to come across numerous warnings for him not to go, or for him to what's going to happen when he goes. And so, but he understands and he's willing to do it, and so he's on his way back to Jerusalem. And as he goes, he lands in a city called Miletus. And from Miletus, he sends to have the elders from the church in Ephesus come and meet with him. He doesn't want to go to Ephesus because he wants to get back to Jerusalem before the day of Pentecost, so he doesn't have time. So he sends for them to come to Miletus so he can talk with them. And in talking with them, he gives them some encouragement. He encourages them to continue to follow his example of not being after money, of not being after personal gain, or having people's opinions about them be the thing that they're worried about. But he also gives them a pretty severe warning about keeping watch over themselves and the church that God has made them overseers of. And he talks about wolves coming in and ravaging the flock. And so in that, I'm going to ask you to read that and think about that a little bit and what that might be. It seems like a very protective part of the book of Acts, when much of the book of Acts is very outward risk-taking. It seems to get to the struggle we've talked about quite a bit in our class about the balance between caring for and instructing Christians and setting them loose to go out into the world. And so in one of the questions for this week's study, I ask you to think about that and just come up with what you think that might look like. Then in Acts chapter 20, he continues on from Miletus, and he in Acts chapter 21 continues his journey to Jerusalem. He is he's on his way. I'm looking for my notes. He's on his way to get to Jerusalem, and you'll notice again all the warnings that he encounters as he goes. The don't go. Agabus is a gentleman that's going to come and give him a warning about what's going to happen to him with a belt and binding and all of that. And so he gets all these warnings along the way, and really chapter 21 is his trip. He sailed from here to here and here to here and whatever, and so he finally ends up in Jerusalem in chapter 21. And the leaders in Jerusalem are grateful when they hear all that God is doing, and they rejoice and give God the glory. But they also point out a potential problem that in Jerusalem all these Jews have heard that Paul is encouraging people to give up the Jewish law, to not live as though they're Jews because they're Christians now. And while that's not true, it still poses a huge problem. So what they decide he ought to do is he ought to take 4 of the members of their church who are Jewish but Christian, who've made a vow. We talked a little bit about vows when Paul shaved his head. The vow would have been a Nazirite vow for some period of time, for either a blessing, thanksgiving for a blessing, a time of repentance, a time of asking God's direction or guidance. It would have been for some period of time. They would have voluntarily entered into it. The Nazirite vow would have meant that there would have been no fruit of the vine there would have been no cutting of your hair, and there'd been absolutely no contact with the dead. If your dad died, you could not go to the funeral because you had made this vow. The first mention of these in the Bible is in Numbers chapter 6. If you want to go take a look at that, it talks about these vows. So there are 4 men who took this vow. And it appears maybe they were quite impoverished. They didn't have any money, so they weren't able to do the offerings to end the vow. And so they encouraged Paul to take some of his resources, take these men to the temple, and begin the process of ending the vow, the 7 days of purification that it would have taken for them to end the vow. And so he takes them there. They get their head shaved. They begin the process with the priests of ending this vow and becoming purified. It's while they're there that people take notice that Paul is there. Now, in his traveling group that ended up in Jerusalem, there are Greeks, Gentiles, not Jewish people. And so people begin to put these things together and say, well, if Paul's got a group that came with him and Paul is in the temple, then it seems likely that though we didn't see him, this Gentile was in the temple. And so they have Paul arrested and brought before the Sanhedrin in chapter 22. And chapter 22 is largely a recounting of Paul's conversion, the road to Damascus, and all of that. But it ends with a very interesting piece. What happens is that Paul is put in chains and he's prepared to be flogged by the Romans, who are trying to disperse this riot that's taking place. Paul just says, "Is it right that you are doing this to a Roman citizen without a trial?" He's referring to what was called the Lex Valencia, which is a law that was passed by the Romans in about 509 BC, and it basically stated that a Roman citizen could not be treated shamefully or harshly in any way, and so it protected them from being degraded, and so the fact that they put Paul in chains turns out to be a pretty big offense in the Roman world. And so you can kind of see the uneasiness about that. Chapter 23 that's going to all unroll and unfold as we move forward. And Paul is going to make his appeal to Caesar, which is another part of this law that would allow him to make these changes, or this ability to go right to Caesar's court to get his case heard. And that's actually going to become the backdrop on which the rest of the book of Acts is lived out. Paul's appeal to Caesar and his finally getting to Rome. As you read this, you're gonna again fall into this pattern of Paul moving from place to place. The plot line has been set in motion now with his arrest in Jerusalem, and the rest of the book of Acts is going to be dealing with the ramifications of that. And that's what the warnings are all about. People understood that when he went there, the Spirit was moving in people. When he went to Jerusalem, he was going to be trouble for him. But as you read that, one of the questions that I've asked you this week is, as you read about Paul and his willingness to testify to Jesus in whatever circumstances of his life, whether they're good circumstances, he's a guest of honor at a synagogue, or whether he's in chains or has been arrested, every opportunity he takes to witness to Jesus. And so I ask you to reflect on that a little bit as well as you fill out some questions. We will be back together again on Thursday night, the 21st, and so look forward to that as we continue our journey through the book of Acts. Take care.